The threat didn't come from Washington. It didn't come from Tel Aviv. It didn't arrive in the form of a missile strike, a new round of sanctions, or a naval blockade tightening around Iran's ports. The most dangerous thing that happened to Iran this week came from inside the building, from inside the regime itself, from the men who are supposed to be Iran's protectors. On April 23, 2026, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, the man who is leading Iran's negotiating team in Islamabad, the man widely considered the de facto co-leader of Iran during this war, walked away from the negotiating table. Not because he wanted to, not because of health, not because of personal ambition. According to multiple intelligence sources and reports coming directly out of Tehran, Ghalibaf was forced out by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the men with the guns. They threw their own negotiator off his own table. And what we are watching right now is one of the most dangerous internal power collapses of any modern regime. Because Iran in April 2026 is no longer a state in the traditional sense. It is a structure where a paramilitary network has effectively swallowed the civilian government whole. And the consequences of that swallowing are about to spill across the Strait of Hormuz, across the Gulf, across global oil markets, and into every gas station from Karachi to Kansas. I'm Flash America. Stay with me. Because by the end of this, you will understand not just what happened, but why it was always going to happen this way. Let me set the scene, because the speed of everything that has unfolded in the last 3 weeks is almost impossible to track without a clear timeline in front of you. On April 7th, 2026, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire after nearly 2 months of intense fighting. It was fragile, it was contested, but it existed. 2 days later, on April 11th, Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi and Ghalibaf traveled to Islamabad, Pakistan. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir mediated what turned into 21 hours of direct talks. The deadline for a unified Iranian counterproposal came and passed. Nothing was submitted. Then it got worse. The IRGC reportedly opened fire on commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz on the very same day that Foreign Minister Araghchi had publicly announced the strait was open. Iranian state television called Araghchi a fool on live air, their own foreign minister. And then, less than 24 hours after that, the news broke that Ghalibaf had resigned from the negotiating team. Not stepped back, not taken a leave, resigned, under pressure, from his own side. Now, you might hear all of that and think, this sounds like normal political chaos in a country under war pressure. Politicians argue. Ministers get sidelined. That happens everywhere. But here is why this is different. Here is why this particular resignation is the most important domino to fall in months. Ghalibaf is not some minor bureaucrat. He is a former IRGC brigadier general. He commanded the Imam Reza Brigade during the Iran-Iraq War. He commanded the 5th Nasser Division. He served as the head of Khatam al-Anbiya, the IRGC's massive construction and economic empire. He was Tehran's mayor. He ran for president 4 separate times. In this war, he was described as handling Iran's strategic matters, while IRGC Commander-in-Chief Ahmad Vahidi led the tactical war effort, and President Pezeshkian managed day-to-day state functions. Ghalibaf was the bridge between the IRGC hardliners and the civilian pragmatists. He was the man who could sit across from J.D. Vance in Islamabad and still have his phone calls answered at IRGC headquarters. He spoke both languages, and the IRGC decided even he was too soft. They burned the bridge, from the inside. Now here is where the story goes from serious to genuinely extraordinary. The official Iranian response to news of Ghalibaf's resignation was to deny everything. The head of the Iranian parliament's communications department, Iman Shamseh, issued a statement calling the reports baseless, attributing them to Israeli media, and insisting Ghalibaf had not resigned from any position. And then, within minutes, literally within minutes, 3 of the most powerful men in Iran posted nearly identical messages on their social media accounts. Ghalibaf, President Pezeshkian, Foreign Minister Araghchi, all 3, word for word, the same statement, claiming there were no radicals or moderates in Iran, only Iranians and revolutionaries, united under the supreme leader. 3 of the most powerful men in Iran, same words, same timing, Same message. That is not coincidence. That is not coordination. That is dictation. Someone wrote that script, handed it to all three men, and forced them to publish it simultaneously. And the only entity in Iran with the power to simultaneously dictate to the president, the foreign minister, and the parliament speaker is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The denial itself proved the resignation. The unified message proved the divided regime. The official statement confirmed that Iran's civilian leadership no longer controls its own voice. So who is actually running Iran right now? Let me give you the names, because every single one of them matters, and most international media is not giving you the full picture. The first name is Ahmad Vahidi. He is the IRGC commander-in-chief, appointed on March 1st, 2026, right as the war was escalating. Vahidi is not a typical general. He is the architect of Iran's overseas terror operations. He commanded the Quds Force from 1988 to 1997, before Qasem Soleimani took over. He is on Interpol's Red Notice list for his alleged role in the 1994 EMEA bombing in Buenos Aires, Argentina, an attack that killed 85 people. This is the man now effectively running a country of 92 million people. The second name is Mohammad Bagher Zolgadar, the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, an old IRGC hand who is reportedly unable to coordinate effectively between the IRGC, the civilian leadership, and the Supreme Leader's office. The third name is Ali Asghar Hijazi, a powerful security official inside the office of Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who reportedly survived an Israeli airstrike in early March and is now under pressure from IRGC factions trying to push him out. And the fourth name, the most important one, is Mojtaba Khamenei himself, the new supreme leader, son of Ali Khamenei. His health and whereabouts have become genuinely uncertain over the past several weeks. And according to informed sources, a military council made up of senior IRGC commanders has established complete authority over the central decision-making structure, enforcing a security cordon around Mojtaba and preventing him from receiving government reports on the actual status of the country. Read that again slowly. The supreme leader of Iran, the man whose word is supposed to be law, whose authority is supposed to be absolute, is being kept in the dark by his own military. He is not making decisions. He may not even know what decisions are being made in his name. This is what a coup looks like when it happens quietly. Not tanks in the streets, not a public announcement, just phone calls that don't get returned, appointments that don't go through, and social media posts dictated word for word by men in uniform. Now, let's answer the question that makes all of this make sense. Why? Why would the IRGC sabotage its own diplomacy? Why would a rational state actor blow up negotiations that were the only thing standing between Iran and complete economic collapse? The answer is the same answer that has shaped every major IRGC decision for the last 20 years. The IRGC needs this war to continue because peace is more dangerous to the IRGC than economic collapse, more dangerous than international isolation, more dangerous than the suffering of ordinary Iranians. Here is why. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not just an army. It is not just a security force. It is not even just a political faction. Through its construction conglomerate Khatam al-Anbiya, which Ghalibaf himself once led, the IRGC controls major portions of Iranian construction, oil services, telecommunications, petrochemicals, and banking. Through its proxy networks, it controls Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various Iraqi and Syrian militias. Through its intelligence wing, it manages Iran's domestic surveillance and political enforcement. Through its political faction, it has progressively colonized every major institution of the Iranian state over the last 2 decades. So when you ask why the IRGC sabotaged the Islamabad talks, the answer is straightforward. If peace comes, all of that is questioned. The IRGC's budget gets scrutinized. Its economic monopolies face pressure. Its proxy networks lose funding. And most dangerously for the men at the top, civilians start asking why an organization that consumes such a massive share of national resources is even necessary. If war continues, none of those questions get asked, because the war itself becomes the justification for everything. This is exactly why every time a moderate Iranian official has gotten close to a real deal over the past 25 years, something has happened to blow it up. The pattern is not coincidence, it is choreography. Look at what the IRGC has done in just the past 3 weeks. IRGC Commander Vahidi and others reimposed the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, enforcing it with missile attacks on Indian commercial ships in the strait. They did this immediately after Karachi announced the strait was open. They sabotaged Iranian negotiation efforts. And then they forced their own former general, a man who spent his career inside the IRGC, off the negotiating team entirely. According to the Institute for the Study of War, this is not chaos. This is choreography. Every move the IRGC has made over the past 3 weeks has been designed to demonstrate one thing, to the world and to its own population. We are in charge. The president doesn't decide. The foreign minister doesn't decide. The parliament speaker doesn't decide. We decide. And the most chilling evidence of how complete this power grab has become is not in the geopolitical maneuvering. It is in the operational details. President Pezeshkian recently attempted to name a new intelligence minister. The appointment failed due to direct pressure from IRGC Chief Commander Vahidi. Vahidi reportedly ordered that all crucial positions of authority be determined and handled exclusively by the IRGC until further notice, owing to the circumstances triggered by the war. The president of Iran cannot appoint his own intelligence minister. In recent days, Pezeshkian has made numerous requests for an emergency meeting with Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei. None of those requests have been fulfilled. No meeting has been scheduled. No communication has been established. The president of Iran, the man constitutionally mandated to run the executive branch, is locked out of the executive branch. The man constitutionally meant to communicate with the highest religious authority is being denied that communication. And Ghalibaf was not just pushed out for being willing to negotiate. According to Iran International's reporting, Ghalibaf was specifically reprimanded for attempting to include Iran's nuclear program as part of the negotiation framework with the United States. The IRGC considered that a red line, and they removed him for crossing it. The name being floated as his replacement is Saeed Jalili. Let that name sink in for a moment. Jalili was Iran's chief nuclear negotiator from 2007 to 2013, a period during which Iran's nuclear program advanced rapidly while international talks went precisely nowhere. He is widely considered the man who can sit at a negotiating table for a decade and never sign a single agreement. If the IRGC actually installs Jalili as the new negotiating lead, the message to Washington is explicit. We are not here to make a deal. We are here to run out the clock. Trump's team has already read that signal. As the White House noted publicly, if Ghalibaf is getting pushed out by the IRGC, it means the hardliners are driving the bus. And you don't hand the keys to the Revolutionary Guards if you're looking to reach an agreement. Now let's talk about what is happening to 92 million ordinary Iranians while this internal coup unfolds. Because this is the part of the story that almost no Western outlet is covering properly. The Iranian economy is in absolute freefall. The International Monetary Fund has estimated that Iran's economy will shrink by 6.1% in 2026. Inflation is running at 68.9%. The currency, the rial, has collapsed to around 1.32 million rials per US dollar. The middle class has been functionally wiped out. Inflation exceeded 50% in 2025 alone. The rial had already lost 60% of its value in the months following the 12-day war with the United States last July. And that was before the current conflict began. The current war has accelerated the collapse, not caused it. Now, with the US blockade tightening, the situation is moving from catastrophic toward irreversible. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said it plainly on Friday. He called the blockade ironclad and issued 3 words that every official in Tehran heard clearly: nothing in, nothing out. On Karg Island, Iran's main oil export terminal, storage facilities are filling up faster than Iran can sell oil. U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent stated that within days, Karg Island's capacity will be completely full. And when that happens, Iran will be forced to physically shut in its own oil wells. Once shut in, those wells do not simply restart. Restarting requires billions of dollars in reinvestment. And even after that investment, the well permanently loses 5 to 10% of its productive capacity. Forever. Iran is not just losing revenue right now. It is destroying its own future export capacity just to survive the next few weeks. And senior Iranian economic officials have reportedly warned President Pezeshkian privately that it could take more than a decade to rebuild the war-torn economy. The governor of Iran's central bank, Abdul Nasser Hemati, has reportedly urged Pezeshkian to take urgent action, including restoring full internet access and pursuing a peace deal with the United States. Even the head of Iran's central bank is privately telling the president to end this, but the president cannot get a meeting with the supreme leader. So the warning falls into a void. The economic reality and the political decision-making structure have completely decoupled from each other. Now let's talk about what the Trump administration is actually doing. Because if you've been watching cable news, you've probably gotten the impression that the White House is just issuing threats and hoping for the best. That is not what is happening. What is happening is one of the most calculated economic strangulation campaigns the United States has executed in a decade. According to a behind-the-scenes Wall Street Journal report from this past week, when the Iran negotiations effectively collapsed, Vice President J.D. Vance, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff spent the entire day evaluating options alongside President Trump in the Oval Office. The intelligence community delivered a sobering assessment. The Iranian government is not a unified entity. The negotiating team, including Arachi, may not actually have the authority to approve any agreement. A power consolidation attempt is underway from the IRGC leadership, and this transformation signals that Iran will adopt a less risk-averse strategy going forward. Trump's response was not what many expected. He did not order new airstrikes. He did not declare diplomacy finished. He extended the ceasefire and simultaneously tightened the blockade. At the request of Field Marshal Munir and Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif, Trump extended the ceasefire deadline to give Iranian leaders time to present a unified proposal. But he ordered the U.S. military to maintain the blockade in full. He turned the screws economically while keeping the diplomatic door technically open. Trump himself claimed publicly that Iran is losing $500 million per day. That number, every day, into a void. And here is the part that should make every Iranian commander genuinely lose sleep. The Trump administration is also threatening fresh sanctions on Chinese banks, facilitating transactions tied to Iranian oil. China has been Iran's economic lifeline, buying discounted Iranian oil through intermediary networks, providing the financial circulation that has kept the regime functioning under years of Western sanctions. Threatening those Chinese banks directly is threatening the last artery that has kept the patient alive. Iran holds roughly $35 billion in foreign reserves and approximately 180 million barrels of oil floating in the Asia-Pacific. That buys the regime perhaps 2 to 3 months of breathing room. After that, if the Chinese banking lifeline is cut and the wells start shutting in, Iran hits what economists call a balance of payments wall. No money to import food, no money to import medicine, no money to pay government workers, no money to pay the police, and most dangerously of all, no money to pay the IRGC's own foot soldiers. An unpaid IRGC is not a loyal IRGC. The security apparatus that crushed protests in 2022 and 2025 cannot be relied upon to crush protests in 2026 if the salaries stop arriving. Only 3 months ago, the Iranian government was on the brink of collapse, as people took to the streets nationwide to protest the economic collapse. That memory is fresh. The Iranian people have demonstrated they are willing to die for change. The question is whether the men making decisions inside the IRGC understand how close to that edge they are pushing. Iran's response to all of this has revealed just how cornered the regime actually is. After the blockade tightened, the IRGC's move was to seize ships in the Strait of Hormuz. But look at which ships they chose. Not American vessels, not Israeli vessels. They seized ships owned by Greece, the United Arab Emirates, and a Swiss-based company. Countries that are not at war with Iran. Countries that do not meaningfully support the U.S. blockade. Iran attacked bystanders because it knows it cannot strike the parties actually hurting it without inviting a response that ends the regime within days. And then, semi-official IRGC-linked social media accounts issued threats to Americans, Emiratis, Qataris, Bahrainis, Saudis, and Kuwaitis, urging them to leave those countries immediately. Note carefully who was threatened. Sunni Gulf states, the very countries that, in many cases, refuse to grant the United States airspace access for offensive strikes against Iran. Iran is threatening the countries that partially protected it, because it cannot threaten Washington directly. The human cost of all this is staggering. General David Petraeus put the oil numbers in stark terms. Following the Hormuz closure in March 2026, oil and LNG exports were stranded. Brent crude surged past $120 per barrel, and Qatar Energy declared force majeure on all its exports. The collective oil production of Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE dropped by a reported 6.7 million barrels per day by March 10th, and by at least 10 million barrels per day by March 12th. 10 million barrels per day, gone. Roughly 10% of total global oil supply vanished because of one cornered regime in Tehran trying to use the strait as a hostage. The maritime blockade also triggered a grocery supply emergency across Gulf Cooperation Council states, which rely on the strait for more than 80% of their caloric intake. By mid-March, 70% of the region's food imports were disrupted, forcing retailers like Lulu Hypermarket to airlift basic supplies. Gas prices in the United States crossed $4 per gallon as the war caused a 30% surge. Vitol CEO Russell Hardy stated on April 21st that 1 billion barrels of oil production will ultimately be lost because of this war, with current losses already between 600 and 700 million barrels. Every gallon of gas you buy in the next 30 days is being priced by what is happening inside a building in Tehran, where IRGC commanders are deciding whether their political monopoly is worth more than their country's economy. The European Central Bank has already postponed its planned interest rate reductions, raised its 2026 inflation forecast, and cut GDP growth projections, warning that energy-intensive economies face a real risk of technical recession if the maritime blockade persists through the summer. This is not a Middle East story. This is your mortgage rate, your gas bill, your retirement account, and your job security, all shaped by the internal power struggle of a single regime. So where does this go? Because this is the part every analyst from Washington to Tel Aviv to Riyadh is running right now. There are 3 realistic scenarios for the next 30 days. The first is the controlled implosion. The IRGC completes its internal coup, permanently sidelines Pezeshkian and Arachi, replaces Ghalibaf with a hardliner like Jalili, and installs Vahidi as the de facto ruler of Iran. The regime survives, but in a far more brittle form. The civilian government becomes purely decorative. Negotiations with the United States collapse or continue as theater with no real intent behind them. Iran's oil wells start shutting in. Inflation crosses 100%. Protests return to the streets, possibly larger than anything seen in 2022 or 2025. And the IRGC must decide whether to massacre its own population again or let the structure fall. There is no comfortable version of this scenario. The second is the negotiation breakthrough. This is the one Trump is quietly betting on. The economic pressure becomes so unbearable that even IRGC factions begin to fracture. Junior commanders whose salaries are not arriving start questioning Vahidi's judgment. A back-channel message emerges that the regime needs to make a deal. A new negotiating team is assembled. A face-saving framework is agreed upon, possibly involving the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, partial restrictions on Iran's nuclear program, and limited sanctions relief. Trump declares victory. The blockade lifts. Oil prices fall from $100+ back toward $70 or $80. The immediate crisis ends. But the structural problem, the IRGC's colonization of the Iranian state, does not go away. The deal buys time. It does not resolve the underlying reality. The third scenario is the one nobody wants to say out loud: catastrophic escalation. The IRGC, recognizing that economic collapse is inevitable regardless of what it does, makes one final desperate gamble: a mass attack on Gulf state infrastructure, a strike on U.S. naval assets, or, in the worst case, an attempt to dash for a nuclear weapon using Iran's remaining enriched uranium stockpile. Trump retaliates. Oil spikes to $150 or $200 per barrel. The entire region is pulled into the confrontation. This is the cornered actor scenario, and the IRGC has demonstrated repeatedly that it values regime survival over the welfare of the Iranian people. If the choice is between losing power and dragging the region into chaos, history suggests the IRGC will choose chaos every time. Here's the thing I want to leave you with. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as it was constituted in 1979, is functionally over. What replaces it is being decided right now, in real time, in the offices and corridors of Tehran. The clerical regime that ruled for nearly 5 decades has been quietly replaced by a military regime wearing clerical clothes. The constitution still says the supreme leader is in charge. The operational reality is that a man named Ahmad Vahidi, on Interpol's red notice list for an alleged terrorist bombing in Buenos Aires in 1994, is now effectively running a country of 92 million people, with the world's third-largest oil reserves and an advanced nuclear program. Every empire that has consumed itself in this kind of internal coup has ended the same way. Either it reforms or it falls. There is no third option that history has ever recorded. The only variable is the timeline of how long the collapse takes. What we are watching in Iran right now is not just a Middle East story. It is a story about what happens when a paramilitary organization grows so powerful that it eats the state from the inside. It is a story about how a regime can lose legitimacy, even while tightening its grip on power. And it is a story about how the global economy, your gas bill, your grocery bill, your interest rate, can be held hostage by the internal politics of a single country in collapse. Tehran will not be the same in 30 days. The Middle East will not be the same in 6 months. And the world will not be the same a year from now. I'm Flash America.
If this gave you the real picture behind the headlines, subscribe to the channel right now and hit the notification bell, because this situation is moving faster than any news cycle can keep up with, and you need to be here for every development. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does the IRGC complete the coup and turn Iran into a full military dictatorship? Does the economic strangulation force a deal? Or does something far worse happen first? I'll see you in the next one.